Dr. Robin Evans Agnew is a professor with the University of Washington Tacoma School of Nursing and Healthcare Leadership. He is a climate and environmental justice researcher who focuses on photo voice with communities in the Pacific Northwest. He is a board member of the American Public Health Association Center for Climate, Health, and Equity. And he completed his BSN at Johns Hopkins University in 1985 and his PhD in nursing at the University of Washington in 2011. So, Robin, take it away. Oop, you're just muted.
Yeah.
I think you're still muted. There you go.
Hear me now? Thank you. Okay, great. I'm glad to be here. It's going to be a fun presentation. It's nice to see a friendly crowd. So without further ado, I should kind of get going. This is a study that we recently just published in the Journal of Environmental Studies and Sciences. And it's been a labor of love for about the past 4 or 5 years to kick this thing off, because all studies take a long time to begin and conduct and finish if you're in my world. So it's kind of fun to give a chance to spend some time talking to you a little bit about what we did. We called the study Voices Unbound. We got a logo. I've never done a logo for a study before, but it's really cool. Once you have a logo, you have a study. It's kind of fun. And this was funded by Earth Lab, which is a interdisciplinary adventure or institute or whatever they want to call it at the University of Washington, who were graceful enough, perhaps they regretted it afterwards, to give us money to do this project. In fact, we added extra money on this because we took this project to part of this project to COP26 with Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments during the pandemic. And I can't move my slide forward, so I'm going to stop sharing. Is that right? Okay, let's see if I can do it this way. Can you see it now?
Yeah, we could just see the side there. It's not a presentation.
We're just going to have to see the sidebar. It's how I do a presentation anyway. So my apologies if this is not big enough. We can zoom in on something.
It works great.
So I'm sitting here on the tidal lands of the Puyallup tribe of Indians, and they are still enduring centuries of oppression, probably about 180 years plus, and are resurgent in song, story, and culture, and still are caring for this earth, especially during Climate Week, which is this week. So it's great to be here presenting with everybody. And since time immemorial, it's always Climate Week on planet Earth. I commit, as part of a land acknowledgement, to caring for this earth, to respectful relations with our brothers, the salmon, the cedar, the rivers, the mountain, and the tide flat communities of Commencement Bay, which you can see in this photograph here. This is really the primary setting for our project today. Okay, so the objectives are to identify environmental justice discourses in the Puget Sound region, to identify approaches to critical discourse analysis methodologies, describe discourses that disrupt mainstream environmental justice discourses. So, warning, okay? It's almost October, so this is a warning, right? When Dorothy goes into the haunted forest to get to the Witch of the West, she encounters this sign. Haunted forest, witch's castle, 1 mile, I'd turn back if I were you. So part of the caveat with this is I think that qualitative research is dangerous work. It is dangerous for oneself. It is dangerous for participants. It is dangerous for the overall community. it is not the easier side of research. Even though qualitative research is pitched on one side of a coin and quantitative on the other, in fact, when you turn the coin over and you begin to look, you see a many-sided and many-faceted diamond right in front of you. It is not one size fits all in terms of qualitative research. Most people think qualitative research is about content analysis. That is just a tool of qualitative research. It is not the methodology. So that's my caution starting out. Here are my two other co-researchers on this, and we had three great students join us on this project as well. But I just wanted to give a big shout out to Tom Kuntz, who the story here should go an environmental studies guy and an urban ecology guy and a nurse walk into a bar. What happens, right? This is the point of interdisciplinary research, right? To really try and work across disciplines to address planetary health. Tom Kuntz is a knockout professor here at UW-Tacoma. He's been talking about doing environmental studies and policy and the policy study interface with that work for a long time. I place Eleanor Ostrom's diagram that she published in Science in 2009, which has really been sort of like a lodestar for some of the work that Tom Kuntz is doing. And I introduce it as an example of the fact that I didn't know about this diagram. I didn't know about Eleanor Ostrom until I met Tom Kuntz. So here's the beauty of interdisciplinary study, is you get to dip into these fields. And nurses are good at this. This is what we should be doing as nurses. But to begin to think about how social, economic, and political settings and related ecosystems affect interactions and outcomes between resources, resource users, governance systems, and users, how we actually deal with the policy, government, environment, people interface. Crazy stuff. Guy on the right is amazing. He's a total rock star in the field of ecology across America. I'm posting the piece that he published in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, which was called Recreating Wakanda for Promoting Black Excellence in Ecology and Evolution. So this guy came and worked with UW-Tacoma. Dr. Shell came with us. He's now a professor at Berkeley. But he came working with us, and I first heard word that he was coming because this was the guy that studies coyote behavior in urban environments and racism. White people see a coyote, they get all bent out of shape. Black people see a coyote and they go, that's just another kind of predator on this strip. Oh, there goes a cop, right? So there's different reactions to the environment based on race. And he's done really interesting stuff with this. And this is one of his Amplify Black Excellence in Ecology and Evolution diagrams that he published in that paper. And really creative, young guy. Both these guys have young kids and were super, super to work with. So hats off to Chris Shell and Tom Kuntz for driving this study and making me think differently about our work in planetary health. Here's another big shout out is to all of the kids and all of the people that have done photo voice studies with me and had me think about this interface between the environment and health and voice and local knowledge. This was a recent study we did with Latino and Asian American students in Tacoma. And I'm going to get to the title in just a second, but we'll just start with this thing right here. Silent but deadly, Silencio pero mortal. This kid lives near the Tacoma Tide Flats and wrote, I see my room and not too much going on, but what you can't see is the dangerous port of Tacoma. I live close to a factory, so every time I open that door, I not only bring in dust and mold, but also hazardous invisible smoke. By inhaling certain material, it can hurt your body over a period of time. This situation exists because people want more money. We can improve air quality by not doing it or finding a good, safe alternative. What I love about this text is what happens between the fifth and the sixth line. Something happens. because he doesn't talk about money on that last line. So just hold that thought for a second. This is a kid of color living in a frontline community and a fence line community next to the Port of Tacoma. So full credit to Chris Schell, you'll hear it here, but he gave the first opening line to the abstract that our paper accompanies. I could not write something like this, but it is beautiful, although difficult to read because of the long words. But the spatiotemporal patterns of environmental degradation are heterogeneous and predicted by legacies of systemic injustice. I think that just about says it all. Where we are in terms of environmental degradation is racially and intersectionally constructed inside where we're facing. So our work in terms of policy work is to try and figure out how we can better learn to move policy in the direction of understanding local environmental knowledge. So here's what we tried to do in this study. We tried to describe the discourses of non-dominant groups in surviving and coping with environmental challenges in the Puget Sound region. We exempted from IRB review. They said, great, you're only going to be collecting postcards from people and you're only asking 2 questions. What environmental challenge is important to you? How are you coping with or surviving this challenge? That's great. All we collected, the only piece of data we collected on the postcard in terms of demographics was we wanted to know what zip code they were in. We figured we wanted to get this data quickly. We didn't want to complicate it. And also, when you start asking more constructed questions about race, class, gender, everything else like that, we wanted to know whether they were over 18. That's what IRB said. As long as these people are over 18, you can be exempt. One of the things that you do is that you begin to kind of start making assumptions about the intersections at play with who you're asking and why you're asking them. We want to come in before making those assumptions about intersections and about how people describe their races. Doris Boutin and myself and Marianne Sanon wrote a paper about this, about the real importance of really thinking hard about why you're asking that demographic question and really thinking hard about, why? Why is it important to know race in this particular question? Why is it important to know class? And in fact, what we summarized in that paper was, if you're going to ask the question, you got to interview the person afterwards to figure out why that question is important to them and what part of their identity is important to them in terms of their participation in the study. So here's what our plan was. Our plan was to do these pop-ups like you see here, right at the night market down on Tacoma docks. Totally fun. People could get there. We had the social media promotion going. We had a bunch of clip cards, clipboards, and we were just getting people walking by outside the food truck tent to fill in this postcard. Pretty quick postcard. There's 2 questions to answer. And we would do these pop-ups and maybe talk about science and some environmental pollution if we had the pop-ups. And then our objective was to begin to do some events at the end, some art installation events to promote, to share these postcards with people so people would be able to come and look at them and respond and react to them, and the community would help us do the analysis. So that was the plan. Then COVID happened, so we had to make some changes in our approaches. Few words around the critical discourse analysis, because I think it's really important. One of the key words inside critical discourse analysis is really beginning to understand how power is being implemented inside the way we talk about things. And so Dave Allen and Hardin kind of gave me some of the central ideas around this particular definition. I'm kind of owning now a little bit longer into the line. We published a paper in Policy, Politics, and Nursing Practice years ago, kind of talking about this, saying that discourses are the patterned and linked systems of text, talk, and action contained in social spaces. We're influenced a lot by Foucault in terms of this idea, because he talks a lot about this weird thing called the dispositive. And the dispositive is something that sits right in the middle of that triangle, how we are allowed to talk about things and not allowed to talk about other things. Now, if you go back to what that kid did, right, in that study where they talked about it's all about money, but then when it came to the conversation about what we should do, that kid felt constrained by something telling them that they couldn't actually mention class, injustice, that it went back to we need to just clean up the air, right? So we have ways of talking about things, and actually Dr. Richards was just talking about that as we came in. The language changes, right? Why does the language change? Why are we using new words for this thing that is still the same type of concept, but we are using new words and attaching it? A lot of times, if you don't look what's underneath that, you don't really begin to understand how power is being used. The changes in language and what language you can use and what language you can't use are being employed to maintain certain power relations. The slide on the right is really to kind of give you an idea of where we've been thinking and where we've been going in terms of thinking around qualitative research. So this is work that Dr. Bhutan and Marianne Stanon at Rosenberg and I formerly sat on. She used to be a student right here in UW-Tacoma, was a master's student right here, and then is now on in the illustrious University of Michigan, doing great stuff with hotel house worker health and occupational health. But we really began to sort of like pick apart this problem where we have post-positivism, ergo quantitative knowledge, as kind of like the center of everything, right? And really what we're beginning to understand is this multiplicity of epistemologies, right? This multiplicity of ways of knowing things, right? Feminist orientations, indigenous orientations, and that's a huge expanding idea, right? It can't be like monoclonal inside indigenous ways of knowing, right? So all of these other different ways of thinking around how knowledge is constructed and how knowledge is generated begin to kind of fall apart. So here's where you can turn off your screens now and go away, right? If you are stuck in a fixed version of reality world, right, where you really do believe that if you look at something on a distribution graph, that is going to be the truth and the fixed truth and nothing but the truth from now on, this is a scary moment for you because everything begins to become unstable in this world that we are looking at, where change is constant and time is meaningless. Okay, don't let me depress you too much. What was going on in the Puget Sound region in 2018, 2019? A mother orca had carried her dead calf on her back for 17 days before she let it go. She drew national attention for this work that she did in our Puget Sound, mainly in the northern Puget Sound around, I think they were last spotted on the west side of Vancouver Island. But this is kind of what drives a lot of the conversations in the Pacific Northwest. It's orca and salmon. You saw it in my acknowledgement, right? We're all kind of focused in that's the environment we live in. We have forest fires, all of those sorts of things going on, right? So as we set out in this study, one of the things that you do in a qualitative study, if you really want to, and I was just talking to Elizabeth about this earlier, is I don't really like the word rigor. I like the word craft, right? If you are crafting a good qualitative study, you really need to state your ontologies, in other words, your worldview up front, and you need to be able to kind of understand and state your epistemology, the way you are thinking about how knowledge is created. So our ontology for the study is that multiple realities exist for participants and observers. And our epistemology is that power relations influence the knowledge generated from marginalized communities in environmental decision-making, and that local knowledge could be understood within the ways people sought to alter these power relations within their responses to our postcard questions. So we were looking at the margins. We were not looking in the middle of the bell curve. What we were looking for was the places where people resisted what we were trying to get to, right? Where they disagreed with us, where they pushed back. because these are the sort of voices at the edges that we too often in quantitative research say, well, that's outside of the mainstream. And all we're really interested in is something that drives us forward that's most generalizable to the wider population. Well, folks, beware, because you've just entered the forest, you stayed along. Now we're into a world where things are not generalizable. Thank goodness. Okay, so we went and looked in the media. We did. I sent the students out to look in social media because I'm not a social media freak. And I looked at, we had a team member look at all of the things that academic institutions were publishing and talking about in the Puget Sound region. And we had another team looking at all of this sort of like the regular mainstream press, the newspapers and the newsletter publications. And we collected all of that and kind of summarized, before we go out and collect this data, what are the mainstream environmental discourses in the Puget Sound area, right? A lot of them focus on ecocentric threats, right? So that's the orca, right? Declining planetary health related to endangered species, right? Nutrients in sea life, right? Where a lot of them were also conversations around individual inactions, right? Water, ocean quality conservation, those things that we can do to save the world, right? And then industry and government actions, all those things we can do there. Government needs to be helping us with sustainability, food supply chain. Tribal sovereignty is a standing discourse in the particular Northwest, because we've got 36 recognized tribes. And how many, Claire, unrecognized tribes? There are at least 10 or 15, right? At least in the general mix, right? So a lot of conversations about that at this state level. And some environmental justice conversations were going on about air pollution. It's actually a standard environmental justice discourse is air pollution and children, right? And women. Usually the environmental justice discourse doesn't get any closer further than that. Ergo that kid talking about air pollution in their home, right? So we collected postcards. We got 1,051. And so this was my big adventure. I've done critical discourse analysis before, but with tight amounts of text, very closely selected text, maybe 15 pages of text, and that's it, right? But this was 1,051 individual postcards, admittedly with not so much text written down on them. But how the heck are you going to analyze this large data set? I've heard that other people have been using critical discourse analysis with large data sets. I think some of them do word search kind of stuff, which I think is just a little weird. But we were going to do this. We were going to go in and get. And plus, it was COVID, so we had a little bit more time to mess around, right? So we had this postcard collections. We went out. We tried to work with collecting from a variety of different communities, and you can sort of see them on the right hand side. I'll pull out the fact that we got students on volunteer in the community day to go out with us to work to go to 2 homeless shelter sites, city-sponsored homeless shelter sites, because we had a homeless emergency in Tacoma. I think it's still going on. But anyway, we went and actually talked to homeless people, not just about being homeless, right? But actually looked at their wisdom. Like, what wisdom do you have around environmental threats that and how you're coping with and surviving those environmental threats? Fascinating conversations to have with people who are unhoused. Asian New Year Festival, Latinx festivals, a bunch of other different spaces. We went to some rural places. There's a skate rink down in Spanaway, which is just out there, down the south towards Mount Rainier, and had some interesting conversations there with people. So that's kind of the distribution, was largely in the Tacoma South Sound area where we collected postcards. So here's how you do critical discourse analysis. Time, relative distance, situating, and context. You gotta let the data sit for a while. When you finish collecting data, you are so close to it. You are so involved with it. You are so ruminating on it that it hasn't had time just to kind of sit as a story inside your head to a place where it begins to settle. So there's no recommended amount of time that you have to wait, but actually jumping into data analysis right after you collected the data is not recommended in critical discourse analysis because it's dangerous. You are now working with discourses, You got to be really careful about how your own discourses are weaving with those discourses that you are observing. You cannot escape your own discourses. Another word that I hate in psych-qualitative research is bias, and hopefully we've eliminated a lot of those conversations. Of course, everybody is influenced, everybody's involved in psych-qualitative research, so you can never distance yourself from this particular place, but you can get some relative distance through time and through becoming occupied by other things. But when you turn back to the analysis, you begin to situate yourself in the context of the people and the places where those postcards are collected. So we did inductive coding, trying to see what was rising up out of the place they were. Tom Kuntz and I were the people doing the principle of the analysis for this. We did some inter-rater reliability. It was fun to do with Tom to try and get us to, it goes around 70-75% inter-rater reliability for how we were coding all of these 1051 data. And then we used open, pretty much pick a number, an axial, try and find some relations around an axis of codes to be able to kind of begin to assign codes to these postcards. And one postcard might have 3 or 4 or 5 codes, right, with it, depending on the types of things that were being said inside of that. We chose to pause after analyzing question 1. We analyzed question 1 separately, and then we moved to question 2 because we were really actually interested in question 2. Question 2 asks, how are you surviving or coping with these challenges? And that's really what we were hoping to kind of get to. And then we were very focused on the idea of, after each analysis session, doing some self-reflection, right? Because self-reflection helps keep you in check because you are working with power. You have power and you are using your power to look at things. And you need to understand, if you are looking at power, you need to understand where you are in terms of your own reflection on your own power. Really difficult, dangerous, scary work. So on question 1, Chris helped us put this figure together. This is what environmental challenges are important to you. And you can see that sort of like the implication with question 1, because we did plain content analysis, is that some are more than others. In qualitative research, beware, because you can't really make that inference, right? But here were some of the things that were presented. People would talk about social justice, what we coded as social justice. So someone, I remember this one because I collected this one myself. We were on the outside of the Puyallup State Fair, walking in, and I'm collecting this postcard from this person, and they were like, yeah, Flint water crisis in Michigan. That's an environmental threat, a challenge that's most important to me. All right, so that's what we collected. So we had industry and government inactions, individual inactions you can be acting it, you can be not acting it, right? What things you do and things you don't do. It's the same text, talk, and action, right? It's the same kind of discourse, okay? The negative, the positive kind of are together. And then a variety of other responses. We took a slightly different step after taking a break, coming back into analyzing question 2. We split individual inactions and government inaction, industry inactions and government inactions out. So this is kind of what we got in terms of the number of responses for these 10-ish types of coded themes within all of this. And what we were really interested in was how were people actually pushing back on the mainstream discourses that we'd earlier identified. So let's just dive into those and have a look at what were those contested discourses. The things that people were saying that really didn't seem to fit. What's an environmental, how are you coping with or surviving that challenge? So people talked about crime. People talked about healthcare. People talked about homelessness and housing. Not just the people who were homeless, but other people, right? These are environmental justice threats to these people. These are environmental challenges, right? Poverty, traffic, commute, really interesting ones around the traffic commute. Not that, oh, it's polluting. It's that I'm going crazy in this commute. It's emotionally exhausting for me to be inside this commute. I take alternate routes. I work from home, right? And then this glorious one called denial and liberals are logical. There's no problem. There was someone at the skating rink who came in and said, I've ignored environmental challenges. It's done remarkably well. I have 4 strong children. They went down, they actually took the effort to write that on a card for me, right? How could I not respect that, right? How could I not respect this piece of data, right here? What is it pushing back on? Why is this discourse often ignored, right? And then racial gender discrimination, really core. I'll show you a couple of pictures of those ones, and civil discord and personal challenges. So sort of like thinking, people beginning to comment on the amount of rage going on in the country at the time. It was 2019. Remember, 2020. It was right at the time of a lot of racial tensions in this country and ongoing tensions politically. So here's the sorts of postcards that we collected from that. We had people talking about. So this was the racial tension ones. I remember collecting this postcard on the left-hand side as well. What environmental challenges are important to you being Black in America? How are you coping with surviving these challenges? I'm not. It's hard. So do you ignore this because it's got nothing to do with the environment? Or do you accept this as an important imperative for work from a marginalized voice? Because the voice is marginalized already because of the way discourses work in the community. Here's another one. This one was actually collected. We're an urban serving university, and so we did a little bit of data collection with our students, and this was from one of the students. We said, the biggest environmental challenge I face is that as a trans woman, I am always very self-conscious in public spaces, both in the presence of men and other women. Most people are nice, but trans women are often the targets of violence. I'm averse to being in badly lit, isolated areas or environments that seem full of conservative or possibly threatening people. How are you coping with or surviving these challenges? I try to avoid being alone in these kinds of environments and try to avoid them altogether. If I can't avoid these areas, I try to make myself small and avoid speaking or drawing attention to myself. What bravery, right? To put that in a text. This is actually speaking and drawing attention inside this data set now that might have been ignored if we were just looking for mainstream environmental discourses. There's something going on with the way we think about environmental justice that misses a voice like this, that perhaps we need to redress. So there's the haunted castle. Here we are at this sort of moment of go, like the what if. Where does this leave us? I think that postcard collection in this way can really provide an opportunity for marginalized communities to have a voice without necessarily any structure or expectations about what can or can't be said. That's what we've shown in this study. Wouldn't it be great if government would do something more than just simple content analysis of textual data? Because when they do context analysis, all you get is this. You get that. You don't get the texture and the quality of what is really qualitative work, which is looking at quality, not quantity. There's a persistence of racial, political, and social division that is an environmental justice threat. And it's not necessarily recognized in the mainstream media as an environmental justice threat. Really, really cool. Maybe this was because of working with marginalized peoples at the edges of age marginalized, race marginalized, but this idea of human needs being an important environmental justice issue, right? The ability to be able to meet my needs for, clothing, housing, food, health. Those basic human needs are often ignored inside our environmental justice conversation. But I remind everybody sitting around this table that the first people of color movement in 1990, when they came up with the charter about what constitutes environmental justice, human rights were like one of the fundamental first needs placed down, and yet everybody alives that, and they go to the environment and they worry about the orca and the salmon when they think about environmental justice. So the real challenge for us is to stay focused on human rights, especially when you get to human rights, when you start to uncover the power relations that are of focus. You're not allowed to talk about human rights in an environmental justice question. One of the things we duked it out with the editors about and changed in the final paper was Tom made a point early on, was that it was interesting how few, because he's kind of looking in a quantitative way, how few discourses there were on environment, on industrial responsibility. Like, more of the discourses were on governmental responsibility. So as a discourse analysis person, you can actually mess a little bit around with something like that and go, is there a power thing at play? Because we broke it out inside question 2, so we were able to see this, right? So we were actually kind of like, by our decision to kind of break out the government and industrial responsibility into two categories, gave us an ability to be able to kind of see, well, what were people saying about industrial responsibility versus government responsibility? It's really interesting, though, if you think about it, in terms of environmental discourses and those mainstream environmental discourses, very, very few stuff, a lot less stuff about industry's responsibility. I heard on the radio today, coming down here, an industry person saying the best thing we can do for improving the energy is for customers to get on board with it and government to get on board with it. Well, I'm sorry, but maybe you can make your green energy cheaper too. Could you work on that too, instead of trying to make a profit out of it? Anyway, I'm getting upset right now. It's dangerous. And then this last one, which is fascinating to me, was interdisciplinary data collection, analysis, and dissemination is dangerous for the researcher. I'll give you a couple of examples. Chris was intensely uncomfortable collecting outside the Puyallup Fair. It's a white rural community in the middle of Trump America. And he came up to me, he was like, this place is dangerous for me. I can't do clipboard postcard collection here. I feel too unsafe. So you want to engage people of color, scholars of color in this work. It had never really occurred to me because of my privilege about how dangerous that space could be. But then hearing also the words of that, the student who identified as trans is another sort of like wake-up call to the danger of this work. I'd say it's also dangerous because it's hard as hell to get published in an interdisciplinary space. That was my experience. I sat down with Chris and Tom, like, where the heck are we going to get this published? I could get a nursing journal maybe to publish it, but no one will read it. So where else can we get this published? And they were like, this journal and this journal. And both those journals were inside their own discipline. And they just flat out rejection. One journal kind of took it and sat on it for like 9 months, didn't do anything with it. And I thought that was a sweet spot. It was very hard to find a journal. This journal ends up being kind of in the environmental studies space. And the challenges for that meant that I had to do another 3 months of study to understand all of the discourses, all of the ancestors inside the work, inside environmental studies, who've been talking about environmental justice, because I've been located in the health field with all of them. So there was some of the challenges with that. Lastly, we did do the podcast. We changed the podcast. We had, we instead of the exhibit display, we did a podcast. We invited local knowledge people into the podcast to share with us. And we played potluck with the postcards, which was great fun. So they just picked out a postcard, reacted to it, helped us with think about analysis. This is before we began the analysis, but part of this. So that would be what I would say is all of this is really about the primacy of local knowledge, the importance of the co-production of knowledge with local people, and that environmental planning should always be considering maybe a deeper critical analysis of qualitative data rather than the qualitative content analysis rubbish that I see most governments doing all of the time. All right, I'm done. That's it. That's my strong opinions on pretty much everything.
Thank you, Robin. Yeah.
Right on.
So I think we're